Iran-Israel round two, there's been a lot of talk about that war happening again very soon. The U.S. has been building up to the reinstatement of these snapback sanctions with military deployments that are getting bigger in the region. And Netanyahu is selling war.
Iran is developing now ballistic missiles that are intercontinental ballistic missiles for 8,000-kilometer range. What does that mean? They add another 3,000 kilometers, and they've got under their atomic guns, the New York City in target, Washington, Boston, Miami, Mar-a-Lago.
He says all of this with a smile on his face. Talk to us about how close we are to round number two, Israel-Iran war.
I think that we're very close to the next Israel-Iran conflict. And as you say, everyone predicts that this conflict in the second iteration will be much worse, much more sustained, and it can draw in much more powerful forces. For example, Russia may be forced to be drawn into this conflict for its own geopolitical reasons. And we can expect that this war could last for a very long time. Last time there's a conflict, it was almost like a test run. It was only 12 days. But this time, it seems as though all the ingredients are in place for sustained war. So let's go over some of the ingredients. The first ingredient is the snapback sanctions. So the Europeans have said that, we've tried our best to reach a compromise with the Iranians, but they are recalcitrant, they're stubborn, they refuse to give up their nuclear testing program, and therefore we are forced to impose sanctions. The Iranians have recently paid back all of their outstanding foreign debt obligations, and Iran has been removed from the SWIFT system. You also have a series of interlocking treaties that have appeared this past month. So, for example, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have signed a mutual defense pact. If any of these nations are attacked, the other nation is obligated to come to its defense. The United States has signed an agreement with Qatar, providing defense. Russia and Iran have signed an agreement as well. It's not a mutual defense pact. Russia is not obligated to come to Iran's defense if it is attacked, but Russia will provide other forms of support. And so what we're seeing almost is a replay of the months before World War I, the outbreak of World War I, when these nations had these interlocking treaties, so that a small conflict, regional conflict that appeared in Sarajevo quickly escalated to encompass all of Europe and most of the world. So I think a lot of ingredients are already in place for a massive escalation. It seems that whatever Iran does, the United States will see it as a provocation to attack Iran. If Israel attacks Iran, Iran will be forced to defend itself. And as a result, it will see all possible belligerents as targets. So Israel is a belligerent, but also we have to remember that the United States is enabling Israel by moving all these air tankers to the region, to Qatar. And so that enables Israel to do long distance strikes against Iran. So the United States is actively enabling Israel, and therefore Iran feels that it is empowered to attack U.S. bases in the region. But if it does that, then it would draw the United States into the war. If it's forced, Iran will close the Strait of Hormuz. If it closes the Strait of Hormuz, that's going to do tremendous damage to the entire global economy. Most of East Asia depends on the Strait of Hormuz for its oil. And so if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the United States may be forced to send in ground troops in order to secure the Strait of Hormuz. And if it does that, then it's basically World War III. The United States is pot committed. It has to go all in now because there's ground troops in the region. It cannot extricate itself.
There's a lot of speculation about Iran's capabilities at this time. Many have said that Iran is weaker, that they took a lot of damage during the 12-day war, and that they are in no position to strike back at this time. Iran is saying something different. The commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force has said they have recovered from the 12-day war and are ready to respond with a fresh attack. Iran has also said that it's not clear that they will be the ones who have to strike back. They might actually attack first if they feel compelled to.
Yeah, I think that the 12-day war, even though the Israelis did a lot of decapitation strikes, they killed a lot of nuclear scientists, they killed a lot of senior military officials. It seemed to Westerners as though it was a resounding success. But when you do that, what often happens is that the population rallies around the regime because everyone feels under threat. Also, I hate to say this, but when you actually remove some of the senior leadership, it actually makes the military much more vibrant, much more dynamic. The reason why is that you allow for much more vigorous, much more creative individuals to rise in the system. And by removing some of the ossified bureaucracy, it allows more for openness, for more innovation. So I think that you will have a much more dynamic, much more creative, energetic leadership at the top right now. If a second iteration were to happen, I think the population would be much more supportive of the regime. I think a lot of these internal divisions that were happening in Iran these past few years, they will sort of die out as the population recognizes that this is an existential struggle for the Persian civilization. The United States, Israel, they're coming in to destroy your civilization. They're not here for regime change. They're not here to impose a democratic regime. They're here to do what they did in Iraq, Libya, and Syria, which is to destroy your civilization. And so I think the people are much more unified. They're much more energetic. They're much more cohesive than before. Also, the Iranians probably learned a lot about Israeli and American capacities during the 12-day war. They know how the Israelis will go about fighting this war, and they know how America will support Israel. So the Iranians are able to basically game theory out the scenario, and they're able now to develop much more effective countermeasures. Remember that the mainstream of the Iranian military are drones and intercontinental ballistic missiles. And what we saw in the 12-day war is that Israel cannot defend against Iranian ICBMs, especially hypersonics. The so-called Iron Dome, there's a lot of leakage in it. So Israel cannot possibly defend itself against a full Iranian strike. And so I think that the Iranian military is going into this second round with much more energy and much more confidence.
Well, you talked about game theory, and you also mentioned earlier World War III and others being pulled into this conflict. Brown University just came out and said that the United States has spent $33 billion on the West Asia, Middle East wars on behalf of Israel since October 7, 2023. Do you see this region, do you see the Iran being targeted for as the catalyst for this World War III? And what does that look like? Because this could happen at any moment. Some are saying we're going to see this attack in October. Some are saying it's going to happen by the end of 2025. It seems like there's enough desperation here on the part of the West, on the part of the US, on the part of Israel for this to have some backing to it.
Right. So we have to remember that historically, the Middle East, Anatolia, the Levant, Mesopotamia, Persia, it's really the center of world civilization. It's a cradle of civilization. And we think that, the Middle East is rich with oil, and that is certainly true. But its major geopolitical significance is the fact that it's the center of global trade. If you want to get from one place to another place around the world, you have to go through the Middle East. If you look at all the major trade linkages being proposed by different nations, it's all centered around the Middle East. So, for example, China has the Belt and Road Initiative, and Iran plays a very important role in that. But then you have the Russian North-South corridor, and that runs through Iran as well. The Europeans have something called the IMAC, I believe it's called the European Middle East India corridor. So as you can see, in Eurasia, especially in Eurasia, Iran is the center of the world. So whoever is able to control Iran controls the entire Eurasian continent. And as I discussed, the Strait of Hormuz is an extremely strategic choke point because a lot of the world's oil runs through that very, very narrow passage controlled by Iran. If Iran were to cut off the oil supply, then the East Asian economies, China, Japan, Southeast Asia would suffer greatly. So I don't see how, if a conflict arises in the Middle East between Israel, United States, and Iran, I don't see how this could not engulf the entire world at some point. So that's the conundrum that the world faces. The center of the world is in the Middle East. If a conflict arises in the Middle East, global trade, global oil supply, it is severely hampered. And the world has to be drawn in at some point, whether it's militarily, politically, or economically.
Yeah, about 90% of Iran's oil goes to China in order to help develop the very trade routes through the Belt and Road Initiative that you just mentioned. And of course, Russia, there was a lot made about the fall of Syria and how that was a very confusing situation for many viewers here, actually. Why did Russia stand down? Why didn't Syria fight back? But this situation appears to be much different, Professor Jiang, because Iran, as you said, is such a key player in the development of this almost post-Western civilizational order. Talk about this, because Israel is at the center of all of it. I mean, Israel is creating all of this havoc. What role does Israel play in disrupting this? And why is it that Israel gets carte blanche to do all of this, including ignite a war that might lead to a Samson option situation like one with Iran?
Yeah, so if you go back historically, we have to remember that Israel is a creation of the British Empire. And it's a creation of the British Empire initially to destabilize the Ottoman Empire, which was the main threat that the British faced in the Middle East. Today, Israel has become the pit bull of the United States. Israel is basically a tool of American foreign policy, and American foreign policy is to destabilize the Middle East, because if you destabilize the Middle East, you just destabilize the entire Eurasian continent. Okay, so I'm sure your viewers understand something called the Mackinder thesis, and his argument is that Britain is first and foremost a naval power. It is not a land power. If Britain were to engage in a land war, then that would be disastrous for Britain, and it would lose a land war. Britain is first and foremost a naval power, and it will always control the world's seas. So the greatest threat to British imperialism, the greatest threat to British global dominance, is the unification of the Eurasian continent. If a great power were to emerge in the Eurasian continent, and it could have been Russia or Germany, then Britain would lose control of trade routes, because this Eurasian power could just easily build railways that connects the entire Eurasian continent and connects it to Middle East, Africa, and then Britain would go bankrupt. Its naval power would be negated, and so British foreign policy is first and foremost focused on fomenting discontent, on conflict in the Eurasian continent. And you can make the argument, and many people have made the argument, that Britain is responsible for many of the global conflicts that have occurred in the past 20 years, including World War I. And the reason why is Britain cannot afford for one great power to emerge in Eurasia. Now, Britain is no longer the great Pax Britannica, but now you're in the Pax Americana. In Pax Americana, their foreign policy follows very much the same logic as the Pax Britannica, which is to make sure that no Eurasian continental power emerges. Now, there's a great threat on the horizon. It's called BRICS. So it's entirely possible that you just leave these countries alone. Russia, India, and China would get together, and they would form a trade network that would unite the Eurasian continent. And if that were to happen, then America would lose access to Eurasia. It would lose access to Middle East. And America is sitting now on $37 trillion of debt. So then it would go bankrupt immediately. So what's happening in the Middle East, it is an existential crisis for America. It needs to control the Middle East in order to prevent this BRICS coalition from emerging. If Iran Russia and China became best friends, and they were able to trade peacefully, which would bring tremendous prosperity to the Eurasian continent, it would destroy the American empire. It would bankrupt America. It would probably force America to go into civil war. So we have to first and foremost remember that Israel is the pit bull of America. Nothing's happening without American approval. If Israel were to attack Iran in the next few days, next few weeks, it would be because America wants a conflict in the Middle East. That's something that we have to remember.
Yeah, yeah. And from the very beginning, Iran has said that it wasn't necessarily preparing for war or even fighting a war with just Israel, that it was fighting one and preparing for one with the United States. But yet you have, and I'm curious on what you think of this, Professor Jiang, because the way that we are being kind of fed information about the role of Israel in sparking this potential World War III nuclear situation vis-a-vis Iran is we're being fed this through people like intermediaries like Netanyahu, who are very boastful about Israel, who almost speak about Israel like the second coming of the United States' empire. Here is Netanyahu again on Ben Shapiro's show, talking about just how much the United States needs Israel.
Well, I can tell you, we shared it with America, but I can't share it with you. Okay? The most advanced offensive weapons on the planet, things that none of the superpowers have, developed by Israel, shared with America. Well, I can tell you, we shared it with America.
So, Professor Jiang, he's basically saying, and this is the narrative you get, is that Israel is in fact in control because of how much the United States really needs it to achieve those objectives you were stating. What do you make of this, and how does it fit into things historically?
Look, I think you can make a very legitimate argument that Israel is in very much control of the American political apparatus. You know, AIPAC is the second most powerful lobby in America. Only the AARP, the pensioners, are more powerful than AIPAC. We also remember that there are like millions of pensioners, tens of millions of pensioners in America, and AIPAC is a very small organization. There just are not that many Jewish Americans. Yet at the same time, AIPAC has direct access to the White House. No matter who's in the White House, AIPAC is able to exert tremendous influence. You have, it seems as though the media, in the financial sector, it's controlled by Zionist interests. So yeah, you can make a very legitimate argument that Israel is controlled of the American political apparatus. At the same time, we have to remember that Netanyahu is very much an American creation. For the longest time, Netanyahu's patron was Sheldon Adelson, who is Jewish, but he's also American. So it was Sheldon Adelson who bankrolled Netanyahu's political career in Israel. And people don't understand this, but Netanyahu, he does not talk to Israeli media. He talks to American media. He refuses to talk to local Israeli media. You can't, if you're an Israeli journalist, you can't really book an interview with him. But Netanyahu is always available to talk to American media. And remember that Netanyahu grew up. He spent his formative teenage years in America. And you can make the legitimate argument that Netanyahu is an American asset, that he could very much be an American intelligence officer. I'm not saying he is, but I'm saying that if you were to make that assumption and you were to find evidence to support that claim, you could find a lot of evidence. So I think that Netanyahu coming out and saying that, we Israel, we control America. The main reason why is that these empires do not like to be seen as bullies. You go back to the time of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire started all these wars around the world. They basically burned down Carthage for no particular reason. But if you go back and look at their history, they always framed it as being provoked into war, as being peace-loving, but because of extenuating circumstances, because they were being threatened, because the opposing side threatened them. They had no choice but to go to war. It's always, we had no choice but to go to war. If you look at American history, Americans believe the same thing. every single war that happened overseas, whether it's the U.S.-Spanish War, whether it's World War I, it's World War II, they were always tricked or forced or manipulated into war. So I think that's just the way that Americans, the powers that be in America, like to frame things. America is peace-loving. It's a peace-loving empire. It's not even an empire. It's a republic. It's not an empire. And so when it goes to war, it's because someone tricked them to go to war. If the United States were to go to war against Iran this time around, it's not because the United States has geopolitical interests that must be protected. It's because Israel is out of control and Israel controls America. Or it's because Iran launched launched a ballistic missile against an airbase in Qatar, or American interests overseas. Okay, they always need a pretext, and Israel provides a perfect pretext. So Netanyahu does no one any favors, especially his own people come on and saying that, oh, we control America. And he's been saying that for the past few decades.
What's so interesting, too, is you had Israel attack Qatar and try to decapitate Hamas negotiators before Trump's so-called peace plan was put on the table. And then you have Trump give Qatar NATO-like security guarantees, which almost sets up a situation where the United States has a model now, a doctrine now to defend with warfare all of these countries that surround Iran, which station U.S. military bases. And Iran has been very clear that these military bases are vulnerable should the United States go into war. And Iran sees Israel going to war with Iran as being a U.S.-driven war. So what do you make of this? How do you see this?
Yeah, I think that if you're Iranian strategist, then you're being surrounded. So not only this treaty between the United States and Qatar, but also the treaty between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. We have to remember that Saudi Arabia and Iran are major geopolitical rivals. They've been rivals ever since the 1979 revolution. They have different branch of Islam. Iran is Shia and Saudi Arabia is Sunni. They both vie for supremacy of the Islamic world. They both sell oil, and they have they are in economic rivalry. So Saudi Arabia very much would like to see Iran, the regime, fall and replaced with a much more friendly regime. So there are all sorts of these pretexts in place. And when America does that, when America provides security guarantees all around the Middle East, right? So America is guaranteeing the security of Saudi Arabia, of Qatar, of Israel, then that sets a stage for a false flag attack, right? So Iran doesn't, even if Iran were to show tremendous restraint, and it has been showing tremendous restraint these past few years, if a false flag attack were to happen in Qatar or Saudi Arabia or Israel, then now the United States is forced to attack Iran in response.
Already we see in the Kurdistan region on that part of Iran's border with Pakistan, I believe it is, we have seen our Iranian military forces be killed. So, and that's just within the hours and days of us talking here. So there is, that is how this began, right, Professor Jiang? It began with a surprise attack, which actually was conducted inside of Iran. And even to this day, Israeli media, I believe it was Haaretz, which recently had an article talking about how Israel is waging an influence operation inside of Iran to try to conduct regime change.
Look, right now in the Middle East, it's a lake of gasoline. All you need is a small spark to light the entire region up in fire. Look, the alliance has been drawn. Everyone's ready for war. Everyone's just waiting for the fuse to be lit. And I think it's going to happen very, very soon. Now, as to when it will happen, what's interesting for us to remember is that for the Israelis, for the Americans, this is just not a geopolitical rivalry. It is also an eschatological war. What I mean by that, and this is very important for your viewers to appreciate, is that there are these extremist religious elements that are both in the Israeli military and the American national security apparatus who see a war in the Middle East, World War III, as fulfillment of biblical prophecy, as the end of the world in order to rejuvenate the world. This is the end times. This is the end of days. And again, I don't think this is really appreciated, how the American national security apparatus is fully committed to igniting World War III in order to force the return of Jesus, the second coming. And these elements in the national security apparatus, I'm sure you've heard of them, right? They're the Mormons. They're the Freemasons. They are the Jesuits. They are people called the Sabbatean Frankists, these extreme religious Jews. Okay, so there are different secret societies embedded with the national security apparatus who all are following a certain script that requires them to start World War III in the Middle East. And once they start a war in the Middle East, then they're able to fulfill their different prophecies, which includes the creation of a world government, which includes the return of Jesus, which includes the arrival of the Jewish Messiah. Okay, so I don't think people really appreciate the eschatological elements, the extreme religious elements underlying this conflict in the Middle East. But I point this out because there's almost like an anxiety or a rush to get this war started as soon as possible. You know, it's insane.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as possible, and it almost feels like, as you said, Professor Jiang, there is this tension built up that's not just about the realities on the ground, but it is about. I mean, we have a defense Secretary of War now, Pete Hegseth, who is a crusader. I mean, he calls himself a crusader. This is his entire ideology is based on getting rid of Iran, and of course China and the left, and the sinners and whatever it is. But these are the kinds of people, and then we go into Christian Zionism, but ideology does drive these people. The realities on the ground for them are almost secondary when it comes to their lust for war.
So 2-3 years ago, Israel imported 5 red heifers from Texas. These 5 red heifers were genetically modified to be perfect. And the reason why is the Bible says that you need to sacrifice a red heifer in order to consecrate the ground for the building of the temple. What this means is that Israel, the extreme religious fanatics in Israel, they want to build the third temple. This is problematic because they want to build it on top of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third holiest site in the Islamic world. So if you think about it, this war between Israel and Iran, if it were to happen, it would provide the perfect pretext to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because then Israel can be like, oops, sorry, a ballistic missile came to Jerusalem and it hit the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it's destroyed, but it's okay because we'll just build a third temple. And remember, if this would happen, if the Al-Aqsa Mosque were to be destroyed, then 1 billion Muslims around the world would be religiously obligated to seek vengeance of some sort. It would be a cataclysm that is unimaginable right now.